Okay, everyone, a big Shabbat Shalom to all of you who are here today, and also a big Shabbat Shalom to you if you're watching this after the fact, if it is still Shabbat, wherever you are scattered to the four corners of the earth. We want to welcome you to the river, as we affectionately call it. If you are watching this after the fact and you wish to come join us live, on the live streams, we do meet every weekly Shabbat on the Gregorian Saturday, and we do so at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. That is the time that we've locked in. And if you're wondering how to join us, just head over to riverbranchfellowship.com and scroll down on the main homepage where you'll see a link to subscribe to our weekly newsletter. And when you click on that, this little form will pop up. Just type in your first, last name and your email, and every Friday you'll receive the weekly newsletter, which, as well as updates from the community, will contain the Zoom login details so that you can come and join us live. We would love for you to come and join us and say hi and be a part of what the Father is doing in our midst. Okay, do we care? Today's teaching is continuing off from last week's teaching. As I mentioned in last week's teaching, my wife and I have been abundantly blessed with the opportunity to become parents for the first time. My wife gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, who's now just over 6 weeks old. And it's been a journey. It really has been a journey for the both of us, where we're now getting to practically live out this shadow picture of parenthood. And with living out this shadow picture, a lot of things that my wife knew on an intellectual level has now started to sink down to our hearts, and it's become living. And as a result of this, many things that are written of in the Word have really come to life for us, especially as servant leaders in the wider body. We're now getting to experience the shadow picture of the most intimate form of discipleship, first and foremost between my wife and I, but then how our wife and I come together as echad, as one, in the hope to raise this beautiful baby boy into a fine young man, should Yeshua tarry, and he gets to live that long. But it's been such an amazing journey. We felt every emotion at once along the way, and the insights keep coming. And so, like I said, today's going to springboard off what we covered last week. So just to quickly recap where we went last week, the Apostle Paul says in Romans 1 that essentially everything about Elohim is actually right there in front of us. He uses his creation to speak to us. Types and shadows are baked into the time domain. They're inbuilt into the creation. And if we have eyes to see and ears to hear, we should be able to look at his creation and the shadow pictures that he has given us to understand not only his plan of redemption, but what it is he's hoping to find in his people. And so, do we have eyes to see and ears to hear what is actually plainly revealed to us in the creation? Because if we have, as Paul would say, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature are actually clearly perceived. They have been made visible. But are we able to see? Are we able to hear what is being plainly shown to us? And if we don't, what would it be that would prevent our eyes from seeing and our ears from hearing? Why does he give us these shadow pictures? Why does he want us to grow from spiritual children into spiritual mature beings? elsewhere, the Apostle Paul would say in 1 Corinthians 2 that the wisdom we are learning, this biblical wisdom, first and foremost, it's for those who are mature. It's for those who are growing past this place of spiritual childhood. They're moving on from the phobos place, this fear and terror of who Elohim is, and they're learning reverence. And as we grow, we learn reverence, and eventually, hopefully, reverence can go to love being perfected. And so this wisdom that's being shown to us through the creation in this time domain is actually a secret and hidden wisdom of Elohim, which Elohim decreed before the ages for our glory. And I believe that this wisdom that we are hopefully learning now and learning to grapple with is actually for the age to come, when there will be a groom and a bride and a ruling governance. And so this is actually given as part of the reason for our test in the time domain. Will we mature from spiritual babes and children into a mature being that not only has knowledge and understanding, but has the wisdom to know how to apply it in a way that's pleasing to our King? And so what would it be that would prevent us from, again, achieving spiritual maturity? What would it be that would prevent us from having eyes to see and ears to hear so that we could learn this wisdom for the age to come? One of the great shadow pictures that that Elohim has given us to enable to see him as he truly is that of the family nucleus, that there is a husband, a wife, and that children come forth from this, and that the husband and the wife will raise these children to maturity so that then the discipleship process can go on. And so in the book of 1 John chapter 3, the Apostle John tells us that we are now children of Elohim. We are children of Elohim. And that one day when he fulfills his plan of redemption at the next stage, that we shall see him as he is. And so if we're supposed to be children of Elohim now, and we're supposed to be growing to spiritual maturity and gaining this wisdom, this is what enables us to actually see him as he is. And so do not be surprised that what the enemy has done is attack one of the most important shadow pictures in regarding to know who Elohim is and to be able to attain the wisdom that he is seeking his bride to have. If the shadow picture teaches us who he is, and one of those shadow pictures is the marriage covenant from which children would come forth, this is why the enemy has specifically targeted to destroy the family nucleus. Because if he can get that shadow picture out of kilter, so to speak, it keeps us locked into this spiritual childlike state. We do not grow. We do not mature. And as a result, we do not learn the wisdom that he is hoping for us to be able to see. And as a result of that, we will not actually see him as he truly is. And so most of you will understand, from watching the teachings for a while, that there is an adversarial position that is not only destroying the family nucleus, and as a result, two of the biggest shadow pictures that the Father has given to us to learn and grow, but he's also using Mystery Babylon to cloud and muddy the waters regarding understanding the plan of redemption and who our King is. And so what these attacks, if you want to call them, they're actually preventing us from growing and preparing our bridal garments. Ultimately, I believe that one of the biggest things about growing in the faith is actually understanding what the love of Elohim is. 1 John chapter 4 went on to say that we have come to believe the love that Elohim has for us. And so again, in the shadow picture of parenthood and children, how do children learn love? It's through their parents. Now, if the marriage covenant is off kilter, so to speak, and then the children are being neglected or abused or whatever, they're actually not having the ability to learn what biblical love is. And that keeps them in this state of EAD, which stands for emotionally arrested development. And because we become stunted in our growth, we fail to grow and know what the love of Elohim is. I know that in my journey, because of the experiences I had from my earthly fathers, which weren't exactly great, I would then go on to project my earthly fathers onto my heavenly Father. Now, John says, by this love is perfected with us, so that we may have confidence for the day of judgment. And I believe this is speaking of the judgment seat of Messiah, which every believer will have to stand in front of Messiah. But if there's something that's preventing us from understanding and truly knowing what the love of Elohim is, how can we then have confidence for the day of judgment if love has not been perfected with us? And how is love not being perfected? Well, if we do not understand love. And how does that happen? If we remain in a childlike state. Again, why has the adversary gone after the marriage covenant? Why has he gone after the family unit? And why is he targeting the spiritual children via the means of mystery, Babylon, leaven, and the things that would muddy the plan of redemption? Everything that we're seeing in the shadow picture in this time domain, whether it be the family nucleus, the marriage covenant, children, all these things are giving us indicators of what's actually going on spiritually. And so do not be surprised that in the quote-unquote religious world, there's a childlike, infant-like state, spiritually speaking. Do not be surprised that that's actually being paralleled in the physical shadow picture, where unfortunately vast proportions of the religious body, the family unit, has been completely blown apart. This is not by accident. This has been targeted by the enemy for a very specific reason, to keep the body in a childlike state. And this is why we need to overcome, not only spiritually, but also overcome maybe the hurt and the pain that we've inherited from the earthly shadow pictures of our parents and what we may have experienced as children. Understanding love is part of our bridal garment preparation. And so what will prevent us from giving and receiving love? What will prevent us from growing in the love of Elohim? Broken families, broken marriages, broken physical children, but also broken spiritual children. And this being done through the leavening and the attack on through Mystery Babylon, in that it seeks to corrupt and misinform those in the faith. And so last week, I spoke about, how has becoming a father been affected by my previous examples of being an earthly father, of having earthly fathers. And I shared my testimony that, I learned what a broken family does to a child. I had to learn this the hard way. And that when I was looking at my son, I had these two questions of, how bad must things be for a parent to physically want to hurt their children or to cause pain and sorrow to them? And the other question was, why would a father abandon his child for no seemingly good reason, right? We're not talking of things when things get messy, like adultery and abuse and things like that. Specifically of a parent abandoning for quote unquote no good reason, which is something that unfortunately I experienced as a little child. And really the answer is simple: hurt people hurt people. both my father figures had never experienced true biblical parental love because their parents were broken. And so the reason my earthly fathers stunted my growth emotionally and spiritually was because that's what happened to them. And that's what happened to their fathers and mothers and their fathers and so forth back through the generations. And that this was coming through the shadow picture of the family nucleus, but also coming from the attack through Mystery Babylon. When they were hurting, their own parents hurt them, this pattern going back generation after generation. And so this brings up the idea of generational curses. You know, generational curses are actually a lot more practical, if I can call it that, as to what is being taught out there in the religious body, especially when you have this hyper-charismatic worldview of the faith. But essentially, what's interesting is that the generational curses are actually within the context of creating Elohim in our own image. That one of the ways is telling you right here in the Big Ten, if you want to call it that, that one of the key sources of generational curses is through the attack of Mystery Babylon. And this is why the Feast of Unleavened Bread is so important, that we get rid of this leaven. But that's only part of the equation. There's the spiritual aspect, but there's also the physical aspect, which creates emotional hurt, whether it be through broken family nucleuses and things like that. All this ultimately pointed to the weightier matter. There's going to be a groom, a bride, and spiritual children in the age to come, the eternal family. And so again, this takes us back to the words of John. What does it mean to be a child of Elohim? Well, if you had a broken childhood, how are you going to understand what it means to be a child of Elohim? If you had broken parents that then went on to hurt you, how are you going to view Elohim when he brings about discipline in your life? You're going to, unfortunately, project your earthly parents onto your heavenly parent, if that makes sense. Something that I know I've been guilty of in my life. And so this is why I needed to overcome both spiritually, but also emotionally. Do we view the body of Messiah with the same love that we do our own children? This is a question that is maybe more aimed at servant leadership within the body. And unfortunately, I believe that the answer to this, painting a broad brushstroke, is no. At best, servant leadership is going, well, I love my king. He seems to love these people. Therefore, I should probably do good by them. Again, that's actually a selfish desire right there. Now, the previous teaching, I mentioned that I could have called it love versus EAD, or love versus leaven, or love versus religion. And I realized that all these things actually generate hurt, and undealt with hurt generates even more hurt. Hence, hurt people go on to hurt people, and the generational curses pass down. The springboard, well, as we address today's teaching off the heels of last week's teaching, I want people to, we're going to kind of speak more especially to the leaven and the religious side. Last week, I spoke more to the EAD side, the emotional arrested development. I focused more on the emotional stunting that can occur from hurt. Today, I want to look more at the spiritual side, this leaven, this religion, and that if these things are not dealt with, again, the outcome is the same. It will prevent us from understanding the love of Elohim. So, springboard for today. Again, this is from the lens of my insights that have come about from being early parents, okay? And so these were some of the musings I had. My son, being a baby, is completely and utterly vulnerable and helpless. I knew this intellectually, but to actually work with it and deal with it, it really becomes apparent. And he's completely and totally and utterly dependent on my wife and I for everything, absolutely everything. Again, this is the shadow picture. Think of the weightier matter. This is pointing to a spiritual house, that there are spiritual children, and that Elohim is the spiritual father. Well, where does this bridal position come into this? Despite his very young age of 6 weeks, what my wife and I have began to observe is that he's actually beginning to have trust in us as parents, even as early as 6 weeks. And I've put here that he's beginning to trust the process. When my child was a newborn, when we bathed him or when we changed his nappy, he howled. He howled, "What's going on?" Rah, rah, rah. And you realize, how can something so small make so much noise? Think of the spiritual connotations to this, right? But after trusting in the process, after routine started to be established, my son no longer screams or howls when he's having a bath or having his nappy changed, because he's beginning to know that when this occurs, the very next thing that's going to occur is that he will be fed. We've began to implement that, okay, we will feed you. Halfway through the feeding, we're going to clean you up because you've made a mess of yourself. We're going to clean you up. And, every so often we're going to have to do a deeper clean in the bath. Changing the nappy is not going to be enough. We need to deep clean you. But he's beginning to trust that even though it may feel and seem uncomfortable that he's being cleaned up, he knows he's going to be fed afterwards. And so now he's calm and placid during bath time and during changing time. Again, think of the shadow picture and the weightier matter that it's pointing to. Being a baby is hard work. I look at my child and I remember saying to my wife, geez, it's not like, because my wife and I, we're beginning to know, parenthood is hard. It's difficult. It's very rewarding. Don't get me wrong. It's rewarding like nothing else, but it is challenging. But I remember looking at him and saying to my wife, imagine how hard it is for him. He's wrestling and coming to terms with the time domain from his childlike state. He's trapped in this little body and he's like, what do these limbs do? And he's experiencing these new physical sensations. And, what's really amazing, it melts my heart. There's been moments where my child is clearly trying to communicate with me. He's going, but he hasn't got control over his mouth, and he's not able to communicate what he's feeling. And me as a parent, knowing him intimately, I'm beginning to see that he wants to communicate, but he can't. Imagine how difficult it is for him. He's come out of a very comfortable place in the womb where things are warm, and he's now having to deal with, bitterly cold Canadian winters and, having to be changed and having to be bathed and these new sensations. And what's going on? In a state of being utterly helpless and vulnerable and completely dependent. And again, my wife and I paused and went, imagine how difficult it is for him. Think of the spiritual weightier matter. Especially, I'm aiming this more at servant leadership, dealing with spiritual children. His way of reacting and communicating is sometimes challenging. But what else should we expect? His way of reacting and communicating initially was crying. That was his only way of communicating something's up. And it's left to my wife and I to figure out what's going on. Is he hungry? Is he uncomfortable? Does he just want to be held? One of the things I've noticed is that sometimes there's actually nothing wrong with him. He's not hungry. He's not uncomfortable. He just wants to be held. He just wants to be loved. He just wants to know that he is safe. And so I'll just put him over my shoulder and go about my day. And it quietens him right down, knowing that he's close to the parent. What is really nice is that he started cooing and smiling now. So that's another way that he's starting to communicate. But predominantly, his primary method of communicating is crying. But what else should we expect? It's not his fault. It's not his fault. He's a babe, literally a babe. What else should we expect? Why should we be frustrated? In fact, we should be pleased that he is communicating, as limited as that communication is. He has a habit of making a mess. But what else should we expect? It's not his fault. I do have a funny anecdote. Heads up, baby toilet story coming in. My child is a boy. We have found out he's got a very efficient fire hose, shall we say. It's like, whoa. And little anecdote that my wife and I have known that when we change him, we have to put a protective cloth on, right? Those of you who have raised boys will know what I mean. And here's the thing. We're doing something to protect him from himself and to protect the environment from this little child from making a mess. He decided to wriggle and do all this and shove away the protective cloth that the parents had lovingly put on there. His fire hose did what it does, and he ended up peeing on his own face. And he was shocked, and he gave this look at my wife of, it was almost like he was saying, why did you allow this to happen to me? He wasn't impressed, but it was almost like, why did you do this to me? And looking shocked and almost stunned and a little bit angry. And my wife is like, why did you wriggle out of the protective hedge? But think of what this points to. Servant leaders, you will know the spiritual application of the anecdote I've just given. But why get frustrated? What else should we expect? It's not their fault. It's not their fault. You can do everything right? You get all your protective hedge and you get the environment ready and all of this, and they still make a mess. He has a habit of being very clingy. But what else should we expect? He's currently going through the 6-week growth spurt right now. Literally, he grows overnight sometimes. And like I said earlier, sometimes there's nothing wrong with him. He's not hungry. He's not uncomfortable. He just wants to be held. He wants to know he's safe. Remember, it's hard work being a baby. All of this will be very overwhelming for him. All these new sensations and stuff. What else should we expect? It's not his fault. So think of these things as we go through today's teaching. My wife and I are truly beginning to appreciate the necessity for parents to have their own houses in order, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, thus raising children without passing on our own issues to them. It's become abundantly clear to my wife. My wife and I had this moment of, thank goodness our house is in order. Thank goodness that we have the house in order physically. Thank goodness that we have overcome emotionally from our past hurts so that we then don't pass on that EAD to him. Thank goodly our house is in order spiritually so that he has the best possible chance to grow up in the faith. It's become very apparent the necessity for parents to have their stuff together so that they don't then pass that on to the children. Because if not, the generational curses will simply pass down. All this points to a much greater spiritual weightier matter. And so, Let's jump into the teaching. Matthew 9:36. When Yeshua saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. The people were essentially victims of spiritually abusive parents. Remember the state that the religious order was in at that time. All the wonkiness and hurt that the religious system was passing on to the people. And Yeshua felt compassion for them. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the master of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. We quote this passage a lot. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. But we forget this little statement before it in Matthew 9, that Yeshua saw the people and he grieved for them. He saw them for what they were. Spiritual children that had been neglected, and it wasn't their fault. Okay? Now, this statement of Yeshua having compassion for the people and the harvest being plentiful, it's also paralleled in Mark chapter 6. And what was really interesting is that when I looked at these two passages, both in Matthew and in Mark, I was reading the context surrounding these statements, both before and after. And what's really interesting is that both Matthew and Mark, when you read the greater context of this statement, it essentially preaches the same message. And I do not believe that this is by chance. I believe that the writers were trying to make a specific point. Okay. And there's something that we can learn from this. But we have to overcome so that we can be of use in this harvest, so that we could be laborers in the harvest where the laborers are few. And understanding parenthood, spiritual children, and the weightier matters that this points to and the need to overcome from both the physical side, but also the spiritual side. We need to do this in order to actually understand this message that these two books are trying to give to us. And so I'm going to do my best to go through this. It's going to be a cursory look, okay? A broad overview. So we're going to look at the Mark passage first, and then we'll look at the Matthew passage, and we'll see what this general message that's being given to us is. He went away from there, speaking of Yeshua, and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. And on the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue. And many who heard him were astonished, saying, "Where did this man get these things? What is the wisdom given to him? How are such mighty works done by his hands? Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joseph?" This is Joseph or Joseph. "And Judas and Simon. Are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. They took offense at him. Now, when you read the Gospels, you will see that Yeshua had a habit of going to the synagogue, preaching, and offending absolutely everybody. Everybody, every synagogue he went to, he ended up offending them because of where the people attending the synagogue, where they were at spiritually. Remember the context of these teachings, that there's a physical attack on the family nucleus, but there's also a spiritual attack coming in on the Mystery Babylon side. And both of these things are working together to prevent us from growing up spiritually and knowing what the wisdom of Elohim is, and thus understanding his love. Okay? I believe Yeshua is purposely allowing his disciples to witness something. He's brought his disciples with him, and it's like he's saying, I want you to see this. You're going to need to see what's going to go down. Why? We'll get to that. But notice, where is the attack coming from? Not only is it coming from the religious, but it's coming from those in his hometown. In his hometown. Okay? And Yeshua is essentially saying, guys, disciples, watch. You're going to need to know this. And Yeshua said to them, a prophet is not without honor, except in his hometown and among his relatives and in his own household. And he could do no mighty work there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. And he went about among the villages teaching. Now, the way that the English from the gospel account is worded here, it kind of obfuscates what the message is actually being given here, because the English would imply that Yeshua didn't have the ability to do a miracle there. But that's not what the text is really saying. When you look at the Hebrew gospel account of Mark, of this particular passage, it says it in a much better way. It says that Yeshua didn't want to do any wonders there. Why? Because of their unbelief. It's not that he didn't have the ability to, he didn't want to. Essentially, he's looking, and again, he's marveling at their unbelief. These are people in his hometown, in his house, in the body, and he's going, where is your faith? Yet you're at the synagogue, hearing the word, and I'm giving you this word, and you're coming against me. I'm speaking truth, and you can't even hear what I'm trying to say to you. Where is your faith? Essentially, Yeshua, the reason he didn't do a work there is because he wasn't going to reward their unbelief. And again, he's purposely brought his disciples here to witness what's going on. I want you to see this. They cannot hear my words. Therefore, I'm not going to do a miracle because I'm not going to reward their unbelief. I actually believe this is why the power of the Ruach has not been granted, generally speaking, in the more miraculous things, because people would be misappropriating that power, shall we say. Whole other line of thinking. But essentially, Yeshua has come to the house. There's a lack of faith. He's not going to reward it. And he wants his disciples to witness that they're even coming against Yeshua. What state is the body in for this to even be a possibility? And he called the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. Now it makes sense. Look at what Yeshua did. Guys, witness this. Understand it, because I'm about to send you out. And I want you to go and do likewise. And you drop down to verse 10. He said to them, whenever you enter a house, stay there until you depart from there. And if any place will not receive you and they will not listen to you, when you leave, shake off the dust that is on your feet as a testimony against them. Yeshua had literally just modeled this as to how he wanted them to operate. But we miss this, what happened before. They will not hear you. It's the religious that are not going to hear you. Do not reward their unfaithfulness. Do not do it. Because I'm about to give you the authority and the power of the Ruach to go cast out demons and to heal people. Be very careful who you do this for. He's just saying, another way of saying it is, only do it if you see repentance. Again, who is the attack coming from? Who were the disciples sent out to in this particular instance? Because if you read the other accounts, it says, go to the sheep of the house of Israel. Go to them first. They cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and healed them. But from the pattern that Yeshua had given them, we now know that they were only doing this among those who had repentance, those who had ears to hear, and those who had faith. King Herod heard of it, for Yeshua's name had become known. Some said John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. That is why these miraculous powers are at work in him. But others said he is Elijah, and others said he is a prophet like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I have beheaded, has been raised. I actually believe you're starting to see that King Herod was starting to squirm. Oh my goodness, what's going on? Avoid, deflect, cover up. Because we know what King Herod's track record was like, right? When his authority got threatened, right? Whoa, no problem. Let's kill all the boys under 2. That's his track record. I believe King Herod was starting to squirm. The passage after this goes on to tell you how John the Baptist had been put to death. And you have to understand what was going on there, that John the Baptist had called out King Herod for marrying his brother's wife. And he said, this is wrong. Now, King Herod's brother, Philip, his wife was called Herodias, and that's who Herod had taken up. Now, what's really interesting, when you read the account, it wasn't Herod that took offense. It was Herodias, the wife. The woman took the offense. She's the one that plotted and brought about John the Baptist's death. Is it not? Go read the story. We're not going to cover it today for the sake of time. But what I'm trying to point out is that what we've seen so far is that we have a religious body that has a lack of faith, is unrepentant, hard of hearing, hard of sight, shooting the messenger of truth. And then also the ruling governance, the secular governance, they've been called out and they're coming against those that are speaking truth and holding to account. And Yeshua is saying to his disciples, be careful. Be careful, because I send you out, what? As sheep amongst wolves. So the passage thus far is giving us the spiritual and secular landscape. Now he's going to show you the spiritual condition of those that the servant leadership, those the disciples were being sent to. The apostles returned to Yeshua and told him all they had done and taught. And he said to them, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. You need to rest. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. Essentially, the people were in a place of take. All they were doing is taking. But again, was it their fault? The spiritual children, the people, they were starved and thirsty. They had been neglected by the religious order, completely neglected and spiritually abused. Was it their fault for their spiritual condition? No. Is it their fault that all they're doing is take? No. Again, my physical shadow picture of my 6-week-old, my 6-week-old doesn't have anything to give back physically. His only form of payment is being so cute. That's all he has to give me back. And the body's not necessarily cute by and large, right? Spiritually speaking. But was it the people's fault? No. But Yeshua is saying, hey guys, you're going to need to rest. Why? Because this is the spiritual condition that the people are in. It's not their fault, but you need to rest. And my wife and I have had to learn this in our shadow picture. Sometimes my wife has to take over because I'm like, honey, I'm done. Sometimes it's the other way around. It's usually that way because my wife does a lot of the caring right now. They went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves, and now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. Like, this is how starved the people were spiritually. They were like, they're like, quick, we need to go there. Like, look at what the people were willing to do. They were like, quick, we need to go there. Like, look at what the people were willing to do. They were like, quick, we need to go there. Like, look at what the people were willing to do. They were like, quick, we need to go there. Like, look at what the people were willing to do. They were like, quick, we need to go there. Like, look at what the people were willing to do. And he went ashore and he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. What then goes on after this passage is the feeding of the 5,000. The people were so spiritually starved that they traveled all over to be able to be spiritually fed and watered at the expense of not realizing we may physically starve ourselves because they were not thinking, right? They hadn't prepared. Again, they were in this childlike state. All they knew is, I need this spiritual food and water. And they did it at the expense of their physical food and water. And Yeshua is showing the disciples, guys, you need to have compassion on them. They just need to be fed and watered and washed. They just need to be held, so to speak. They need to be nurtured. They've been neglected. They've been spiritually abused. By the way, you're going to have to maybe bend over backwards a bit for them. You take care of their physical needs. And we know the story of the feeding of the 5,000. And the disciples are going, what we're going to do? And Yeshua's going, guys, calm down. Calm down. Let Elohim provide for them. Now, after the feeding of the 5,000, so we're now going in the context after this statement of Yeshua having compassion on the people, for they were like sheep without a shepherd. They go off, the disciples go off by boat, and Yeshua ascends up the mountain to have some peace and quiet, which is telling you that feeding the body, even with Elohim providing miraculously, it's tiring, it's draining. You need to take time to rest, okay? And so the disciples are on the water, and the storm comes along, and Yeshua is up on the mountain, and then we pick up here. He saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." The disciples are freaking out, absolutely freaking out. They are not recognizing their master. Right? What's their reaction? It's a ghost. You can actually see maybe a bit of the hyper charismatic mindset. You know, in the modern day, we go, oh, it's the demons. Everything's the demons. Have they got their own version of that going on? What's really interesting is the phrase, "it is I," even in the Greek, it actually can be translated as "I am." Interesting, huh? Take heed, I am, do not be afraid. Whew. That's powerful. He's having to remind them, guys, I am. It is I, right? Despite the apostles walking with Yeshua, their response was one of fear. Notice that. I mean, understandably so, right? They're in a storm, literally. Now, again, think of what this is pointing to. When the storms of life come our way and our King is trying to come beside us and help us through the storm, what do we usually do? We panic. We panic. We go to fear. What I find, it continues. When he got into the boat with them, the wind ceased. Again, I believe you're seeing a divinity statement here. Who alone has the control of the wind, the ruach? I am. And they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. It's telling you why, A, they reacted in fear, and B, why they could not recognize who it was walking beside him. A heart condition prevented them from recognizing their Elohim in human form. Is leaven at play? A fear response, a response of, it's a ghost, it's a demon. How about recognizing Messiah in each other? What prevents us from seeing him in others? I believe you're being told something because the disciples are experiencing a storm, okay? Think back to the Psalm 42 and 43 series that we did, where we spoke about the storms of life coming over us, that Elohim allows these things to clean us up, right? And quite often in these storms of life, as part of our cleaning up, we get chastised and reproved. When we want a spiritual hug, we get reproof and chastisement. We get what we need, not what we want. And what's our response? Fear, pain, blame. Now think about this. We covered this last week. Who does Elohim reprove and chastise? The children that he loves. Who does Elohim prune? Trees that bear fruit so that they can go on to bear more fruit. If your earthly and spiritual way of viewing authority, or like if you've had a bad learning curve of what an earthly father is, and you've been abused by the spiritual authorities through men, through the religious system from the Mystery Babylon side, what happens when this storm of life comes along and Elohim is trying to clean us up? Do you see what's going on here? The hurt, the EAD, the leaven, it hardens our hearts. It prevents us from seeing. It prevents us from hearing. And what Elohim is trying to do in our lives, we see as a bad thing. And we freak out and we go, it's the demons. Do you see what's going on here? Do you see the importance of overcoming now? Finishing the context of the Mark passage, what follows after this event, it goes on to speak of the people recognizing Yeshua and bringing all the sick to him, imploring him to heal them. The people are literally begging him, please. Why do you think Yeshua was constantly trying to sneak off? Because he was physically drained, emotionally drained. Because of all the people, the spiritual children being in a place of take, right? But what did he say? Have compassion. It's okay. It's not their fault. Then comes the famous Mark 7 passage. Mark chapter 7 is Yeshua coming against the Pharisees for elevating the traditions of men above that of the Torah and the covenant of Elohim. And as a result, hurting all the people, causing the people to transgress and causing the people all kinds of problems, even to the point where he says, through your traditions, parents are not being honored. You are responsible for children not honoring their parents. You are responsible for bringing these people to a place of spiritual hypocrisy. And you're hurting and neglecting and abusing these spiritual children. Woe unto you. This is the context of Yeshua having compassion on the people. It's a mess. The people are emotionally hurt. The people are spiritually hurt. And he's showing his disciples, guys, this is what you're up against. Follow my example. Follow my example, because the religious authorities are going to come after you. The secular authorities are going to come after you. By the way, don't reward their lack of faithfulness. Don't you be giving them the power of the Ruach in their lives when they're unrepentant. Mark is highlighting the state of the house, starving children who've been hurt and acting accordingly. The children are simply a product of their environment. The religious, both the leaders and the people that would come against those who aren't keeping up appearances, spiritually speaking. Because what does Mark chapter 7 say? That the Pharisees were coming against Yeshua's disciples saying, hey, why don't they wash their hands according to our traditions? They were using the leavened traditions of men to act all self-righteously. And as a result, that if you didn't keep up the spiritual appearances, cast them off. You're not good enough. You're unrighteous. You're a sinner. Off you go. And so now the people are either left to follow the delusion and the self-righteousness or be hurt. Gee, that's a great choice. The religious, both leaders and people that would come against those who serve. They came against Yeshua. They came against his disciples. Those who have heart problems preventing them from seeing Messiah clearly and reacting with fear to him. Why would you do that? Because you've been broken in the family nucleus level, but you've also been broken by the spiritual authorities. So now when true spiritual authority comes in your life, what's your reaction going to be? Is the proverbial dog in the trap? You're trying to set them free, but bite, 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 bite. Is it their fault? That's the Mark account. We'll go through the Matthew account very quickly because there's some interesting nuances in this one. In getting into a boat, Yeshua, he crossed over and came to his own city. So this is the parallel of where we came off in Mark. Here's what's really interesting. As I was looking over at this, when you look at him coming to his own city, it wasn't actually Nazareth at this stage. It was actually Capernaum. Now, the reason we know this is when you compare these two passages, Luke 4:16 through to 31, and Matthew 4:12 to 13. This event comes after these passages, and these passages basically tell you that when Yeshua began his ministry after coming out of the wilderness and being tried by the adversary, one of the first things he did is go to Nazareth, right? The town where he grew up. And the famous Luke 4 passage is when, again, true to Yeshua fashion, he goes to the synagogue in Nazareth and says, teaches from Isaiah 61. And basically, after he's finished saying what he's saying, all the people want to drive him off a cliff. Yeshua really offended the people in Nazareth. They drove him out. They wanted to chuck him off a cliff. It was that bad. And so we find out by comparing these passages that after Nazareth drove Yeshua out, he went and dwelt in Capernaum, which is in Galilee. And also you read that one of the other reasons Yeshua dwelt in Capernaum was because John the Baptist was arrested by Herod, and we know the story there. So Yeshua is going, the religious authorities are coming after me. The secular authorities are coming after my cousin John. I should probably withdraw to Galilee. And we know that he would come to Capernaum. Just some backdrop. And behold, some people brought to him a paralytic lying on a bed. And when Yeshua saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Take heart, my son, your sins are forgiven." Now, in the Mark passage, we read that Yeshua didn't want to do many miracles because of the lack of faith. But it does say that he still did do a few. This passage is telling you why. He saw their faith. He says, that I can work with. That I can work with, and thus healing comes of it. What you're being shown there is that if you're in a state of unrepentance, you will not have healing in your life, whether it be spiritually, emotionally, all of that. Take heart, my son, your sins are forgiven. And behold, some of the scribes and Pharisees said to themselves, this man is blaspheming. The scribes knew exactly what Yeshua was truly saying. If you read one of the other gospel accounts, it says that the Pharisees were saying, whoa, 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 only Elohim can forgive sins. Who are you to say that? Think about what Yeshua is saying. I actually believe this is why Yeshua is calling this paralytic his son. But Yeshua, knowing their thoughts, said, why do you think evil in your hearts? For which is easier, to say your sins are forgiven, or to say rise and walk? But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. He's literally saying, I'm Elohim, by the way. That's what he's saying there. That's why the Pharisees were accusing him of blasphemy. He said then to the paralytic, rise, pick up your bed and go home. And he rose and went home, and the crowd saw it and they were afraid. And they glorified Elohim who had given such authority to men. Oh, look at that. They were being brought to a place of Phobos to then give glory to Elohim. Interesting. Why is Yeshua doing this? Those that had eyes to see and ears to hear would know what's going on here. This is the promised redemption of Elohim here on earth in the flesh. And Yeshua passed on from there, and he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, follow me. And he rose and followed him. Matthew was a tax collector from Yeshua's second hometown of Capernaum, when you compare all the gospel accounts. Remember, Yeshua grew up in Nazareth. He got chased out of there, and so he started to dwell in Capernaum. Matthew would have been well known among Capernaum for the wrong reasons. The tax collectors, most people would probably know this, but they were seen as below criminals in terms of social order. They were seen as traitors to the Jewish people for working with Rome. So Yeshua is literally calling the lowest of the lowest according to the social hierarchy of the time. Doesn't look very good, does it, on the outward appearance? As Yeshua reclined at the table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Yeshua and his disciples. Oh boy, here we go. This does not look good to the religious. The equivalent of today is Yeshua coming and sitting with the bikers. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? Notice where the Pharisees go. They don't have the guts or the spine to go to Yeshua himself. Where do they go? They go to those around him. This is actually predatory behavior. This is predatory behavior. Look at who the religious are going after. They're not going after the shepherd, the one with the authority. They're going for those around. Who did the enemy go for in the garden? Did he go for Adam? No, he went for Eve. It's the same pattern of behavior. It's spiritually predatory in nature. The religious are doing this. But when he heard it, he said, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. For I came to call the righteous, but not sinners. Yeshua is attributing verse 13 to himself, by the way. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. That's a Yah statement. And Yeshua is saying, I came to call sinners. Again, like this would have infuriated the Pharisees and the religious. They would not have heard this. They wouldn't have wanted to hear this. He's still not keeping up appearances. Then the disciples of John the Immerser, came to him saying, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" So not only are the scribes and the Pharisees essentially saying, "Hey, why aren't you doing all these religious things?" But now the disciples of John are saying this. Well, why aren't you keeping up spiritual appearances? And Yeshua said to them, "Can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast. No one puts a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch tears away from the garment, and a worse tear is made. Neither is new wine put into old wineskins. If it is, the skin bursts, and the wine is spilled, and the skins are destroyed. But new wine is put into fresh wineskins, and so both are preserved." When you understand the greater context of the Matthew and the Mark account, you actually realize what Yeshua is trying to say with these parables. I believe that Yeshua is essentially saying that those who hold on to the religious leaven, or those that use religious practice as a form of show and spiritual validation, they do not mix well with others. That's what he's saying. They do not mix well, to the point that when they do mix, they cause damage wherever they go. That's what Yeshua, I believe, is actually saying. Look at the context of what we've just seen. He goes to the synagogues, boom, it blows up. And he says to his disciples, "By the way, guys, they're coming after you. The religious, they're the ones to watch out for. Sure, be wise around the secular authorities, but watch out for these guys." Look, when you put them together, it tears even more. You're in a worse state. What's interesting is that unshrunk cloth has not yet been washed in water. When fabric would be made, you would rinse it out through water several times, because then the cloth would shrink and then it would remain as to what it is. It's interesting, right? Look at what Yeshua is saying. These guys haven't been washed in water. They're puffed up. They haven't been shrunk in the washing process, being humbled, being brought to their knees, so to speak, this humility of bowing, shrinking. This less of me is more of him, or more of him is less of me. Yeshua is saying is that those who hold on to religious leaven and show, they don't mix well. And when they do mix, expect destruction to occur. Why do you think Yeshua sifted his disciples, allowed them to be sifted? Why do you think he'd give challenging words? The whole John chapter 6 account where he drink of my flesh, eat of my flesh, drink of my blood. And a load of the disciples are like, and they walk away. Why? What are they holding on to? What's blinding them? They were unshrunk cloth. They couldn't be worked with. Following this, the miracles just keep coming. Then comes the account of the woman of flow of blood is healed. We're not going to read the account for the sake of time, but essentially you have a woman in an unclean state that touches physically Yeshua and is healed. He's allowing himself to be touched by the unclean. That doesn't look good to the Pharisees. It does not look good. Not only is he eating with tax collectors and prostitutes and sinners, he's allowing the unclean to touch him. Whoa. Yeshua then raises Jairus' daughter from the dead. The people mock him when he says she is just asleep. They mock him as he goes about doing the Father's business. Again, think of what this is telling us. Yeshua heals 2 blind men because of their faith. He says, according to your faith, let it be done so. And 2 blind men are healed. Yeshua casts out the demon of the mute man, but is accused by the Pharisees of doing so by the power of the prince of demons. Even when you do good and it's clearly Elohim doing these things, it's the demons. Accuse, deflect. What are they deflecting for, though? Lest they be exposed. Because the people around that time, the spiritual children, they're starting to go, hang on a minute. These religious leaders are not who they say they are. To the point where it even says that the people would listen to Yeshua, and you get this statement of, this man teaches like with authority, unlike the scribes and Pharisees. They didn't have the authority. It was just knowledge, information, technicalities, hypocrisy, whitewashing. Then we get this passage. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray earnestly to the master of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. And that concludes chapter 9 of Matthew. Chapter 10, we're not going to read it. You can do this in your spare time. But it's Yeshua giving his disciples a preparatory speech, if you want to call it that, for what they will face once they're sent out. To parallel what we read in Mark. He gives them the whole spiel. He warns them that they will be persecuted. Who by? The Sanhedrins, the religious. There will be people you go to, they will not house you. Shake the dust off your feet. Do not waste your time with them. Why? Because the religious and those who are repentant do not mix. Because when they do, destruction occurs. What's my point in all this? If it hasn't become evident. And this all came about as I'm watching my physical son grow up and the insights that would then come forth from it. We have starving spiritual children out in the body. Again, last week I asked these 2 questions. How bad does it have to be that a parent would bring harm physically or emotionally to their child, or even spiritually? How bad does it have to be? How bad does it have to be that a parent would abandon their child for no good reason? Because, by the way, this is rife, spiritually speaking, in the body right now. Starving spiritual children who have been hurt, neglected, and as an outcome of this, all they can do is take. Is that their fault? That's who Messiah is asking us to serve. People that are hurt, neglected, spiritually and emotionally abused, sometimes even physically. All they can do is take. Even a healthy child, all they can do is take. Never mind one that's got issues. Starving spiritual children that are completely vulnerable and helpless and totally dependent. Is it their fault? You know, when my child, when there's nothing wrong with him, but he just wants to be held, I say to my wife, he just wants to be loved. That's all anybody wants, to be loved. Are we going to be the vessels of the love of Elohim? Well, how are we going to give the love of Elohim if we've not overcome ourselves? Starving spiritual children that have a habit of making a mess. Is it their fault? Think nappies, bath times. Even when you're trying to clean them in the bath, they make a mess. We found this out a couple of times, my wife and I. You know, here's an interesting realization that I had that I hadn't thought of. We speak about the milk of the word, right? The milk, the milk, the milk. Turns out that a newborn baby struggles to even handle the milk. It comes up quite a lot. They need help processing. You need to burp them and wiggle them so that they can actually digest even the milk. They're going to make a mess. They're going to struggle with even the milk. Is it their fault? Because we think of the milk as being easy to drink. Tell that to my 6-week-old. Starving spiritual children who struggle to communicate what they truly need. Is it their fault? The only way my child can communicate initially was crying. I now have the joy of he's now starting to smile and coo, and the giggles are going to start coming soon. But it's predominantly crying and grunts. The religious, both leaders and the people, that cast off those that don't keep up spiritual appearances according to their own leaven and self-righteousness. Those that would rather deflect and accuse as opposed to humble themselves. That would come against those who are just trying to serve. And then across the board, having heart problems that prevent us from seeing Messiah, let alone in each other. This was the example from the disciples, those that were trying to serve. So no one's off the hook here. No one. This is the condition that we're in. And it's happening physically through the broken family nucleus, and it's happening spiritually through Mystery Babylon. Bit of a sorry state. Having heart problems that cause us to react with fear when we see his hand working in our lives. Or go, it's the demons, it's the ghosts, right? Let's blame Satan for everything that is going wrong in our lives, when it could actually be the Father through the storms of life asking us to look in the mirror so that we can serve this broken body. You know, I realized in one of my looking in the mirror moments that things that my child does that I find almost endearing and cute when the body does it, why do I feel frustration when with my physical child, I'm like, oh, they're there. Why the disconnect? I'll tell you why the disconnect. We all suffer from a problem called pride. Pride, self-righteousness, leaven. By the way, all leaven does is expose our pride, because all forms of leaven, lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, especially the pride of life, the pride of religious life. Oh, those people, they're sinners, they're whores, they're tax collectors. They don't look good. Don't let them touch you. Matthew 21. For the sake of time, go look at this in your spare time. But before these verses that we're going to read, the preceding context of this is the triumphal entry. Then Yeshua flipping tables in Herod's temple. Then Yeshua cursing the fig tree, Go watch Curtis's last teaching where he goes over the fig tree. The religious leaders challenging Yeshua's authority. And as a result, Yeshua goes, tell you what, where's John's baptism from? Because if you answer that, then I'll tell you what authority I do this. And he catches them out, doesn't he? Because the Pharisees go, well, if we say that John's baptism was from heaven, he will accuse us of why didn't we listen? But if we say it's of man, then the people will come against us. And they go, we don't know. Again, they're avoiding, deflecting. That's the context. Verse 31, this one, the context of this is the parable of the two sons. The father asks both his sons to do something. One says he'll do it, but doesn't do it. One says he won't do it, but then ends up doing it. Yeshua says, which of the two did the will of his father? They said the first. The one that said, I'm not going to do this, but then ends up going to do it. He says, truly I say to you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes go into the kingdom of Elohim before you. Didn't pull back his punches there, did he? He was saying to the Pharisees, you are the proverbial son that said you would do what you're told, but then do the polar opposite. These tax collectors and prostitutes, okay, they may have said they wouldn't do it, but they actually then went on to do it. Which is more pleasing? And then you drop down to verse 43. Therefore, I tell you, this is the parable of the tenants of the vineyard. He gives another parable of where a landowner gives his vineyard to these tenants and he goes away and he wants to reap some of the fruit from his own vineyard. So he sends his servants to pick up some of the fruit. And the tenants beat up the servants. And then they do this again. And the owner of the vineyard says, you know what? I will send my son. They won't do this to my son. And what do the tenants do? They kill the son. Saying, if we kill the son, we get to keep the vineyard. Therefore, I tell you, the kingdom of Elohim will be taken away from you and given to a people producing its fruit, i.e. the tax collectors and the prostitutes. When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they perceived that he was speaking about them. He was calling them out. Why do I mention this? Because right after this is the parable of the wedding feast. The king sends out his invitation to the wedding feast. One didn't listen, one was too busy, and some of them actually beat up the messengers. So the king was angry and sent his troops and destroyed those murderers and burnt their city. Then he said to his servants, the wedding feast is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Who were those that were found not worthy? The religious. Those in the house. Those entertaining their leaven, those persecuting those speaking the truth. Those that were not keeping. You get my gist. Go therefore to the main roads, highways, byways, and invite to the wedding feast as many as you find. The main roads. This is where the prostitutes hung out. This is where the robbers were. Think the parable of the Good Samaritan. Where did the guy traveling get beat up? On the main road. And those servants went out to the roads and gathered all who they found, both bad and good. And so the wedding hall was filled with guests. What's my point? Let not the unworthy be us. We are of those where the message to the wedding feast has gone out. We get the choice to be either the messengers of it or those spoken of in the parable that were found unworthy. And those that were found unworthy were the religious. Those that were choosing to hold on to their leaven, their self-righteousness, and casting off those that wouldn't keep up religious appearances, hurting and neglecting the spiritual children as a result of this. Are we going to be those found unworthy, or are we going to be like his disciples, being sent out to the hurt, to the neglected, to the sheep that are off scattered? And if we are going to be those servants, do we actually care that this is the condition of the people that we've been called to serve? Do we care that this is the spiritual condition of those around us? Let me paint a really visceral picture to send the point home as we close up. How would you see if you saw a newborn child black and blue? It would sicken you to your very core. This is what we're dealing with spiritually speaking. His children, spiritually black and blue. Do we care? Do we care? We'll stop here for today. Amen.